Hello and welcome. We will get started in just a minute. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will start in just a moment. Thank you all for coming and welcome to Gray Associates Demand for Higher Education Programs webinar for today. We'll be going over all of our different data trends that we've seen, our results through February of 2023. I would like to welcome Dr. Keith Howard, the Vice Provost and Professor of Mathematics at Mercer University, who will be joining Zach Paz, the man behind Gray's PES Markets. It's going to be an insightful conversation, I'm sure. A few housekeeping items to get started with. Take a look at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can click on the Q&A and add your questions. We will get to as many as we can during the session, and we will certainly follow up later with you if we run out of time. At the end of the presentation, Elaine will navigate us as we go live with our systems. She can review national data for your choice of program. Please put your program requests into the Q&A at any time during the presentation. The earlier your request, the more likely we will be able to get to it. After the presentation, after our webinar, you will receive a link to the webinar recording and presentation slides that will come in the next few days. Please look for it in your email. And now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Zach.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to join you from cloudy Arizona today. Nice change of pace for us out here, and a pleasure to be here with Keith. And Keith, if you'd like to say hi yourself.
Yes. Hello to everyone, and glad to be here from Macon, Georgia, where the storms have passed. And we're sunny today, so really nice to be inside.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Awesome. So we're going to get started today. And before we jump in, it's always good to give everyone a little bit of a reminder of Gray. And if you're not as familiar with Gray, we're solely focused in higher education, really focused specifically around evaluating your program portfolio and what we believe is a complete program evaluation system, which brings together four crucial aspects of a program that pull in also institutional aspects as well. The four are mission, front and center. Why are you offering the program? How does that relate to your overall institution of the mission of your institution? Academic standards can be anything from faculty mix to student progress to student outcomes. Margins, how much are your programs and your courses costing you, and how much are they making, to be able to understand that and ultimately support the mission. And then finally is the markets. What's going on outside the four walls of the institution, so that you can understand what are the trends in student demand, what employers are looking for, and what your competition is doing. And so today we'll be focusing on the markets aspect, but one key to all of this is actually wrapping around all of this data, and it is with people and process. Without the right people at your institution to leverage this data and a process to actually work through it and integrate it into your decision making, it would be very hard to actually, the data would actually be pretty useless. So with that, we also help facilitate an inclusive and data-informed evaluation process. So if that's something you're interested in, we can always talk to you about how we go about that. So let's get to the trends for this month. The first thing we'll be looking at are the current demand trends, looking at our enrollment data. Before we do that, I do like to show you kind of how we think about student demand overall. We think about it as a past, present, and future look at what students are interested in. We say we start with past because we start with the IPEDS Department of Education completions data. It's the most comprehensive data on how many students received a conferred degree in each year by institution, by program, and by award level. We say it's passed because they've already made a decision to take the program and actually complete it. But again, it's most comprehensive. It's one of the best data sources that you can get around student demand. But there's a lot of things changing and changing rapidly. So we also like to look at enrollment data. We work directly with National Student Clearinghouse to develop this a report that looks at both new student enrollment and total enrollment. So we can really understand what students are interested in the most recent terms. And then when we think about what's going on futuristically, we like to think about what's being searched, and some other data source from in Google. And then we'll also talk about a couple other data sources that we use to look at that future look at what students are interested in. Right. So let's start with one of the more recent data sets looking at enrollment data. And right now we're looking at the master's new student enrollment. And for a student to be counted as a new student in this, they actually have to be shown up for the first time at a master's level. And so this is a count by year for fall from 2018 to 2022. And we can see in fall 2022, actually master's enrollment declined. Compared to 2021, that fell 8%. But if we compare it over a 4-year period, just so that we can see a little bit more of a longer term trend, it's actually down about 1% annually on average. Okay. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Master's enrollment, new student enrollment is down. Now that will change by program and program type. So it's always good to look at the details and really understand that. But if you're seeing a decline in your master's enrollment overall at your institution, this will help give you the context. Well, that's going on overall nationally, not just at our institution. If you're growing, then you're outpacing the market. So again, it gives you that external context to help you understand what's going on internally. When we look at the fall 2022 new student enrollment data, we can see some of the largest programs that in terms of enrollment. Business administration is more than 2 times the size of the next program at the master's level, with 45,000 new students at the master's level. That's followed by social work. Then we have computer science and business analytics, which are pretty related in many cases. And then that's followed by registered nursing. So you can see there's a mix of both health professions when you start to look at public health, audiology, school counseling, and education, mixed with those business and computer science and business analytics programs. Now, these are the largest programs, but we also want to know what's growing. And so when we look at new student growth year over year, data analytics and data science grew 41%. So although we saw an overall decline in master's enrollment, there are still programs that are growing. So you always want to understand, in my program portfolio of master's degrees, what programs are steady and large, like business administration, but also how do I mix in programs that might be a little bit smaller, but are growing faster, and having that right mix of a portfolio of large, stable, smaller, and growing. And so some of the other programs that have experienced large growth or fast growth: psychiatric, mental health, nurse and nursing, information technology, clinical psychology, medical informatics. You can see the list here. But again, the key here is that although there's an overall decline in new student master's students, there are programs that are still growing in that. So identifying that can help you with your enrollment targets. So we looked at masters. Why don't we take a look at bachelors? And so here's the new student enrollment in bachelors. And actually, there's an increase from year over year, 1% increase from fall 2021. It's still down over the long-term trend, but we have seen to have flattened out over the time period. Right? So that's good, slightly different than what we're seeing at the master's level. What are the largest programs at the bachelor's level? Not surprisingly, we see general studies. A lot of times what we hear, especially at the bachelor's level coming in, students typically don't have a major, right? And so all of that is categorized into general studies to start. And that's another big reason why you want to look at some of the past data, like the completions data, because they actually went through their education to actually make a decision, right? So starting out general studies, not surprising. Then let's look at some specific subjects that students are enrolling directly into when they're at the new bachelor's level. Business administration is the largest. So again, I'm sure that doesn't surprise anyone that it's both the largest at the master's level, but also at the bachelor's level. And then we see some STEM programs: biology, psychology, registered nursing, computer science, engineering, and mechanical engineering are all in the top 10 for new student enrollment. So why don't we look at what are the fastest growing? And at the bachelor's level, cybersecurity information assurance grew 32% in fall 2022 versus fall 2021. We have health, physical ed at 14%, computer science at 13%. And so again, very similar, we saw only a 1% increase in the overall trend for bachelor's enrollment, but digging into the details, we can identify some programs that are growing at a much faster pace.
Let me say that it's really important to look at these trends. For example, when I look at cyber and the data analytics, we identified those programs 2 or 3 years ago as being potential growth areas and areas that we should expand into. But of course, it takes time to expand. And so paying attention to those trends over time is important, because one of the things we have experienced here at Mercer is, as we have moved into those programs, there's tightness in the job market to hire instructors in those areas. So you can run into obstacles getting those programs online. And so it's very important to try to get in early, but also understand what those trends are and when you're going to hit market on those programs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Keith. That's great insight from how you've leveraged this type of information. Absolutely. And it does take time. So how do you keep track of something you see now, and you may not be ready, but keeping track of that over time to say, okay, now we're ready to pull the trigger. Has anything changed? Is it growing faster? Is there a different need? So that's great. So let's go a little bit more in the future, seeing more indicators of initial interest, looking at the Google search trends. So again, we track over 900 keywords for over 900 academic programs. These keywords that we're tracking are program specific, like bachelor's in business administration, master's in business administration, bachelor's in cybersecurity. Those are the types of keywords that we're tracking for each of the 900 programs that we're covering. Right? So overall, we're looking at a 3% increase in program searches. And you can see the increase in searches over month has increased each month. And in this month, it's been 3%. So what are the highest searched programs? We look at business administration, not surprising. One thing that we will always make sure that we harp on, and a reason why we have multiple data sources, is because all these data sources have their strengths, but they also have their frailties. But when you see them all pointing in the same direction, whether that's size or growth, it really does give you a better insight and more confidence in what you can learn from the information. So these are the highest volumes in February 2023, followed by registered nursing. Here's cybersecurity information assurance, largest program in terms of searches, but also was one of the fastest growing in terms of enrollment. What about fastest growing in terms of Google searches? Now we see 2 different data sources telling us that cybersecurity is a fast growing program. So we can be pretty confident that cybersecurity is a growing program now. In this case, Google searches for the keywords we're tracking grew 116%. Following that was marketing and marketing management, 87%. And now we see business analytics, which we saw in the enrollment data, grew 54%. And some other related fields or more emerging areas, artificial intelligence, which we see a lot in the news lately, especially in the most recent couple of days. Programs related to that are growing 43%. And even some arts programs are growing: music, fine arts, cinematography. So it's not just about what we hear all the time, artificial intelligence. There are other the arts programs as well that we're tracking that are seeing significant growth as well. So another data source we look at is non-degree courses. We scrape data from Coursera and Udemy to really understand, again, this is another indicator for what students are interested, because they're actually going to these websites, signing up for these programs. And so it's a really good indicator for what people are interested in learning about. Here's the February 2023 highest cumulative course enrollment volume, the largest being the Science of Wellbeing, the second English for Career Development. And so you can see some of these programs are really just about how do I become better, self-improvement programs. But then we get into some very tactical and very technical, like programming for everybody, Python, neural networks, and deep learning. So that's where that AI search terms that we saw in Google are now also showing up in the near term in terms of what students are actually enrolling in from Coursera perspective. We also compare month over month or year over year changes. So the largest growing courses on Coursera: Foundations, Data Everywhere, Foundations and User Experience. And so you can start to see what is changing over time in terms of being large growth. The Science of Wellbeing was one of the largest of all time, right? And it's still growing, very similar to like business administration, for example. And then we also look at Udemy data. So this is looking at parent category rankings. These are categories that are pulled together from a Udemy perspective. And we see development and IT and software, business and marketing are all the top growing categories in Udemy. Teaching and academics, see design, finance and accounting, photography and video. And here's music as well. So you start to see trends across all these data sources of where things are large and growing. And again, that helps us be a little bit more confident in what we're able to learn from the information. So let's switch gears from what students are interested in to what's going on in the employment market. So we're looking at February job postings data in our sample database. We're looking at up to most recent data February for bachelor's and graduate degrees. So we've identified within the job posting that they're requesting at least a bachelor's and a graduate degree. Now, what we're seeing here is actual decline in the number of job postings, 19%. And that's not very surprising, especially what we're hearing in the news about hiring trends right now. And I'd like to ask Keith if there's anything that you've noticed from an employment perspective on any influence on your programs or how you think about your programs.
Yeah, so traditionally during periods of job decline, there tends to be an uptick in terms of people searching out for higher ed credentials. And so we would usually see, particularly in our non-traditional undergraduate programs and our master's level and sometimes professional level programs, that there will be some growth associated with that. And what we're seeing this cycle is just the opposite. People are not necessarily looking for to invest in new credentials. They're looking at this job market differently and waiting it out. But what is where we are seeing some uptick is people willing to invest in micro credentials, some certificate programs, micro master's programs, some lower level in terms of investment and commitment programs. So this has been, I think we've heard this all very, repeatedly throughout the economy. This scenario seems different than others that we've experienced similarly, that we're not getting that same uptick from the recessionary pressures.
Thank you for that. All right. So digging into the details here, we can look at what are the highest number of job postings by occupation. And so these are standard occupational codes coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. General and operations managers and registered nurses always in the top in terms of occupations. But from there we can see, and this is all related to, again, business, bachelor's and master's. Computer and user support specialists, human resources, marketing, management analysts. So again, we're seeing a little bit of alignment between what students are interested in, what's growing from, we saw marketing all the way through to, again, what are the most in-demand jobs based on what employers are posting. And you can see here's a number of management level, from general to marketing to managing analysts to even construction managers. So when we look at what's trending right now, we can see, we can compare year-over-year growth trends. We can see some of the fastest growing occupation grew 11% year-over-year. And that was actually secondary school teachers. And actually 10% was elementary school teachers. So both of the fastest growing occupations in our database were teachers, which is a little bit surprising for us here. Other fast growing programs, recreation workers, registered nurses, preschool teachers. You can imagine recreation workers, as we start to get into definitely out of COVID, but also into the more summer months, that's where we can most likely a seasonal increase in this aspect. So what we are able to do with these individual data sets is not only dig into the details, but then we bring this all back together into one aspect of the program evaluation system, which is our markets dashboard. The markets dashboard puts all the pieces of the puzzle together from student demand, employment, competition, and degree fit so that you can see all of these pieces for each program. And in this case, we're looking at every individual IPED's CIP code all in one place. And so you can have a one place to get a snapshot of a program, and then you can leverage all the information and dig into those details. So what we've designed here is a way for you to kind of sort through all those 1,500. Imagine if you're looking for brand new bachelor's programs, there's about 500 or so IPED CIP codes that are relevant at the bachelor's level. Relevant being that it's the appropriate level in terms of education, and it's also the requested or the typical level from an employment standpoint. What does it typically take to get employed in the job market? Right. So what we're looking at here is a list of bachelor's programs ranked based on a market attractiveness score that leverages all of these individual databases, volume, growth, and other metrics to help you sort through those different options. The program of the month that we'll be looking at today is economics. And at a high level, again, this is just a high level. In no way is this the answer. It just tells you that from a market perspective, economics should be pretty attractive overall. Well, what makes it attractive? In this column, we can see student demand is very high. So that means students are searching for this, students are enrolling in it, and students are completing in it. We see competition has a low score. In that case, it means competition is less favorable, meaning there's more competition for this program. Not surprising, a lot of institutions have an economics degree. So just based on volume right there, you're going to be facing competition with an institution next door, in your region, nationally, maybe even online. And the final piece is the employment, or the third piece is employment, which is 98th percentile, telling us that this is one of the most in-demand programs from an employer perspective. So aligning the jobs to the program from both a direct comparison, but also what are the opportunities for graduates, even if they're not going into what they're quote unquote being directly prepared for. And then the final piece is direct degree fit, which basically just tells us, is this appropriate at the bachelor's level? In this case, it is. One thing that we leverage in this, and one thing you should always be aware of when you're looking at IPED zip codes, is that that you want to look at multiple levels of zip codes. And in this case, if we looked at just economics over time, the economic zip code, the single zip code for that, which is 450601, we can see that there's been a 5-year decline in number of completions. Well, if you actually look at the 2-digit level, the 4506, you would see that economics has actually been flat. It's just a lot of completions are actually being moved into econometrics, or econometrics and quantitative economics. So it's just a cautionary tale of not just focusing on one zip code. You will always want to make sure that you're looking at both the 2-digit, the 4-digit, and potentially other zip codes that aren't in those related 2 digits or 4 digits.
If I could, this is another area where in about 2019, we made notice of this just by doing exactly what you said within the grade data. And we encouraged our business school to diversify that major to add a quantitative economics, because not only did we see the trend in the data, but we also know that expanding into quantitative economics was not a high cost for us, because we those courses and the expertise were already here on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's it's an easy win.
Absolutely right, and it pulls in those additional potentially cross-disciplinary courses. In this case, more mathematics, more statistical analysis that can come into play in this case. Here's an example of one university that we noticed had a large shift, where we see the University of California switched from their economics basically to econometrics. And you can see, yeah, students are still graduating in economics, but they most likely changed their offer, maybe adding a few courses, all which maybe use the same resources that they already have, to now increase their student interest over time in the students that actually complete their program. Right. So again, just want to make sure that you're seeing how things are trending, because if there's shifts that are happening, you might want to be aware of that. Maybe there's small changes, not resource intense changes, that you can actually make that will make a big difference in this case. So the student demand section for economics, again, it's scored in the 98th percentile. The 98th percentile basically tells us this is a top 2% program based on how we're scoring it. So all that tells me is we want to look into the data here to really understand what's so good about economics from a student demand perspective. We think about student demand in 2 categories: first, the size, and then the growth. And then we look at multiple data sources. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, all of these data sources have their strengths, but they absolutely all have frailties. So when you look at them in one place, you can really see, you can really get a better picture of what's going on. So from a student demand perspective, we have all of the size indicators are in the top 9%. And some of them are even the top 2 and 1%. Now we have the volume metrics. Again, this is very key, because you might be getting volume metrics from your internal resources or other research that you're doing. The key that we found is we want to understand what the context of that data is, right? Is 24,000 completions a lot or a little? It'd be very hard to really know that without the context. So again, this 98th percentile tells you, yes, it is a lot. It's in the top 2% of programs. And then we see, we can look at growth metrics, either from the percentage or the unit growth. We like to look at both because when we're looking at large programs, if they're growing large, it's harder for them to get that higher percentage growth. So when we look at that. In this case, we saw on the previous page, completions are down, but that's only because it's shifting. So when I see a -9 in completions, that would cause me to start asking questions. Well, that's a pretty large increase. You can notice that by this low percentile here, right? But overall, this is a very healthy from a student demand perspective. Again, external market, including all factors in this case from a student demand perspective. Here are the searches specific to economics. And as we saw on the previous page, we look at a longer term in the scorecard, but you can dig into the details and say what's going on from a month-to-month perspective. In this case, in February, Google searches for economics grew 3%. Okay. So not only is the longer term look of a year-over-year comparison up, but we're also seeing it continue that trend on a month-to-month basis. Okay. So here's the employment section of the scorecard. Employment, we take a multiple view perspective on employment. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Department of Education, the government's crosswalk from iPads, zip codes to standard occupational codes. And that's a great crosswalk, but at the bachelor's level, it can be very hard to really use that information just by itself. And the reason we say that is because we've studied the American Community Survey to really understand if you graduate with an economics undergrad degree, a bachelor's degree, what do you do after that? What are the occupations you go into? And in this case, we see down here, only 12% of graduates with an economics degree go into what the government calls direct prep. Now, does that mean you should throw away the direct prep data? I don't think so. We have a lot of debate about that here at Gray, but it does mean we should look at it from different perspectives, right? And so we also take into account what do they actually do after they graduate, and that's our second crosswalk that we use, which is the American Community Survey Bachelor's Outcomes. So it looks at the occupations that they go into and recalculates kind of their share of the employment numbers. So we get those two perspectives. Then we also have the outcomes from the American Community Survey. So no matter what occupation they went into, what were the typical earnings of a bachelor's graduate from an economics degree? 66 in the beginning of their career, age for graduation less than age 30, but their earnings potential 30 to 60 jumps up to 152, which is in the top 2% of earnings. So we can see the outcomes are pretty strong for economics graduates. When we look at specifically comparing the direct prep jobs to economics in our job postings database, we can look at what are the highest job postings by occupation code related to economics, and business analyst was one of the largest occupation codes related to, or job posting titles related to economics. Followed by business systems analysts. You can kind of see really, so again, when you're thinking about your undergrad economics graduate, a lot of what the market needs that could be related is actually a business analyst, right? So what are you doing to prepare your students for that? This could give you that insight to say, are we preparing our students to be business analysts so that they can get and be more employable and have success in the job market? And then we can look at what skills are related to those jobs: analytics, finance, project management, marketing, accounting, data analysis, business requirements. So is there a part of your business or your economics undergrad that includes project management? Because most likely those are skills that employers are looking for because they are posting for them. So again, using that skills data to really help you understand what you can be doing better with your curriculum, to inform curriculum, and things like that. This is what I was mentioning about the two crosswalks, right? If we look at the direct prep crosswalk from the NCES, there's 6 occupations that they match to. When we look at the American Community Survey, economics graduates actually go into 485 different occupations. It's a 479 occupation difference, right? And here are some of the top occupations for economics majors when they're between age 30 and 60, so mid to late career. Lawyers is number 1, not far behind as managers, financial managers, chief executives on legislatures. And so you can see kind of what are the top outcomes based on what actually happened looking at American Community Survey versus what is directly related based on the government's crosswalk. And then the third category is understanding what's going on with your competition. So this is economics. We're in the 20th percentile. And in this case, we always like to say the higher the percentile, the more favorable the section is. In this case, it's actually not favorable based on how we're scoring it today, right? Campuses with graduates, 613 nationally, that's in the top 2%. I don't think that surprises everyone. There's a lot of institutions. Most institutions will have an economics degree. We can see one thing that I always like to look at is, okay, so what? There's a lot of campuses with graduates. What does that actually mean for the opportunity in terms of program size? And so in this case, I like to look at the average and median. And the average program size is 38. So if you have an economics program, you can look at your graduates for 2021 and then compare it to that 38 number. Are you higher or lower than that number? And that's just for every institution. You can then dig into peer institutions. So you can do some benchmarking on your program size. Is your program where you think it should be based on benchmarking against peers? And then if you want to be more conservative, you can look at the median program size, depending on, and so in this case, 13. So there's a lot of institutions, probably a lot of very large institutions that have economics programs that are driving up that average program size. And then the final category is degree fit. Again, what I mentioned already is to say, what's the right degree level for this program? Another example would be registered nursing, which is appropriate the associates, bachelors, masters, and beyond. So there's an appropriate level for registered nursing across the board. In this case, not too dissimilar, but majority are at the bachelor's level from both a completions perspective as well as an enrollment perspective. And then when we look at the typical educational attainment of the occupations related to this program, 44% are at the bachelor's level and actually 27% at the master's. So again, very appropriate at the bachelor's level, but there is opportunity at other levels as well. Leveraging the systems, you can also look at what are the demographics of this program. How does this look nationally? How does it look locally? How does it look regionally? And then how does that compare to the demographics of your specific institution and the program, your economics program? In this case, 28% of the completions in 2021 were white men. And we have the next 3 were international men, white women, and Asian men, right? And so first is understanding that. Second is then, how does that differ from your institution? And then third, what can be done about that? What can you do specifically to change these types of demographics if those are types of goals that you have for your program or just overall for the program? Now, I showed you each individual piece, but that now comes back into being able to see all this information in one place. So gathering this data and saying, okay, let me look at each program, each of my programs in a one-stop shop so I can say, is this an opportunity for growth if it's a current program? Well, all of the indicators are telling us potentially yes. You might be outpacing the market, and one way to do that is looking at the benchmark data, right? Benchmarking your program size. or you might be well below that. You might want to invest. Maybe there's changes you want to make to the curriculum. Maybe you want to change it to econometrics. Maybe you want to, So pulling this all together again in one place helps you gather that information, use the data as a platform for discussion to inform your decisions. Okay. And then one thing, just a reminder, if there are other scorecards you want to look at today or even after today, we can absolutely send those to you, and please put those in the chat. So I'm going to hand over the reins, give you a little change of voice to have Keith talk to you about a little bit of what he's doing at Mercer, leveraging some of this data.
So I'll start with just a little bit of an introduction. Mercer University is a mid-sized private doctoral granting institution in the state of Georgia. Our mission is defined by the 7 imperatives you see right there at the bottom of your screen. We are located in the state of Georgia. For those that don't know, Georgia is a HOPE grant state where students can, with certain grades, can go to college with full tuition through the state-sponsored HOPE grant. And so that makes a difficult competitive environment for private institutions. So that's just a little bit about us. Want to advance? And so what I want to talk with you today about is sort of the newest expansion of how we are using the grade data in our decision making. And so this newest expansion deals with financial aid for standalone certificate programs. So traditionally, standalone non-degree programs are not eligible for financial aid. Those are areas where either the students have to direct pay. The federal government, the Department of Education, has reinstituted what they call gainful employment, which is a scenario where if you can demonstrate and certify that these non-degree programs do lead to gainful employment, and those students will be able to repay any aid that they receive, they can become eligible. And the required metrics to evaluate these programs or deal with the repayment rate, the completion rate, and the debt to earnings ratio for completers to identify that, yes, they will be able to repay this financial aid. And so what we have looked at are what metrics can we consider to determine whether or not our students will be able to make these repayments, and we often have to do this based upon non-direct data, because for existing programs, we may not have had the tracking to be able to report directly in terms of what students have earned and what students are, where their placements are. For new programs, that data doesn't exist. And so how can we replicate that data by looking at what are the market forces? And what we've been able to do is look at the combination of enrollment data, employment data, and looking at the wage analysis associated with those. And Gray allows you to drill down those markets. So depending upon whether you have an online program and you need to consider this from a national perspective, or if it's a on-ground program where you may have to look not just within the state, but even a tighter locality, you can begin to drill down so that you can make those decisions as to whether or not this fits that metric or not. And so, part of that gainful employment is knowing where to look. So another use of the data is being able to identify, so if we're going to open this for a particular CIP code, what jobs do we need to look particularly at? How do we make both the market and the skills that we're trying to match with this program match up with the employment market to be able to make that decision that, yes, these are gainful employment situations where those students, where we anticipate they will land roles or increase their employability roles within those areas. And so we have to be able to make those connections, and the great data help us to do just that.
Keith, if I may ask you, do you find that you come up with ideas with the data, or ideas come through faculty, and kind of what's the process there for either?
There's a mix of the two. So, part of what we do is we have lots of ideas that arise from the faculty. Of course, within this gainful employment area, this is the place where, the deans are really urging us to move in this direction. And so that's a lot of that is faculty driven, and we're trying to accommodate and protect the university so that we make the right choice in those areas. But the data is there to assist us in making that right choice, so that we're not just shooting from the hip, that we have some concrete data, and that we've done our due diligence in terms of analyzing the scenario. It goes the other way as well, because, as a university, we do like to know what are the trends, particularly in our area, and where should we be making moves and where should we not make moves. So, we do kind of look at the data and just see where the trends are, and how does those trends match with our current programs and our mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so we like to make that connection.
Right. Do you find that your faculty are receptive to the data, or do they have different reactions to it? Or
they tend to be receptive after you explain it to them. There's a long-term introduction of the data. Most of our faculty have had long careers where this was not available to them.
Right.
And so it's a new form to them. And for some of them, it takes a little work to have them to understand the data and learn how that data can assist them to make the arguments that they want to make. I think once they realize that the data is really, the data doesn't have a vote. The data is here to either assist your argument or to help to evaluate your argument. And once they understand that, the receptiveness grows tremendously.
Right. Yeah. One thing that I've noticed over the last decade of getting data integrated is it's really about that transparency of what it is and why you're using it, and then also the inclusion piece is huge. Right. Actually having them included and evaluating and understanding it, and coming up with their own conclusions about the data. And in some cases, go ahead, please.
Well, a big part of it is to help them decide what their future path is. It's not for us to necessarily decide, our need for them as faculty. Is for them to help them to decide what their future trajectory is for their programs.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that. All right, so in summary, we looked at a lot of up-to-date data on both new student enrollment. We saw some of the largest and fastest growing programs at the master's level. Data analytics is the fastest growing at 41%. At the bachelor's level, we saw cybersecurity grow at 32% year over year. From a Google search perspective, Google searches continue to happen for academic programs, which is great. Again, what we're seeing here is cybersecurity was one of the fastest growing in searches. So now that's 2 data sources where cybersecurity shows up. When we look at the employment market, not as great of a story there, with 19% decline year over year. But again, when you start to look at the details, you can still identify areas that are growing, where we saw secondary school teachers grew 11%. And then for the program of the month, we saw economics. It's a long-standing program. Lots of, most institutions have a program, but it is still growing, right? New student enrollment grew 4% year over year. I neglected to mention one of our data sources looking at the scorecard is international student interest. And it actually has high interest from international students as well, right? So not only domestic interest, but international. And then the outcomes for graduates, as we saw from both what they're being directly prepared for is high, but also we know that economics graduates go into many different fields. And if we just look at their outcomes, no matter where they ended up, the volume of opportunity is there and the wages are high relative to other programs. And then what we heard from what's going on at Mercer is leveraging this data to identify those skills needed in the employment market so that they can take advantage of what's going on in higher education to provide micro credentials and allow their students to get funding for those credentials. So
Zach, we do have a question, and I think the data is going to be pretty interesting. It is for market research analysts. So I'd ask Elaine if she has time, if she can show that to us.
Yeah, market research analyst will be, it comes in a couple of different flavors in terms of the data on the program scorecard, which we'll show you today. But when you start to look at the employment outcomes or the employment metrics for that, where you can dig into what are the jobs being listed, we can really get at the specific question of market research analyst, because that's really an occupation. The question is, what education program leads to that, leads to the most employable graduate for that specific job? And really that's going to be a mix of marketing, some statistics, most likely, if depending on how deep you want to go into the analytics space. But Elaine, please.
Do you want me to, if you can stop sharing, I can share. There we go. I think I'm at full screen. This is at the bachelor's level. Where it's a small, and chime in, Zach, when you want, it's a small program at the bachelor's level, but when you look at the completions by award level, what you see is at the master's level, is where you're really seeing the completion volume.
Right. And this is, again, marketing research program, where it is a subset of the greater marketing general program. So majority of the data for the graduates that are related to the graduates that would be, most likely feeding into a market research or marketing research would be in the marketing CIP code. But let's just stay here for this purpose, right?
Okay.
This is in a more a smaller niche area that, again, would most likely fit within a larger program. And we can see there's nationally at the bachelor's level, there's only 2 programs at the bachelor's level, and their programs are they have 8 students in this. And as Elena mentioned, this is majority at the master's level, right? So more appropriate at the master's level. Did you want to pull up the marketing CIP code? Marianne, were there any other?
Yes, while she's pulling that up, we have a question. Could you please clarify what is the percentage of workforce with master's degrees? Right.
Great question. So from the Bureau of Labor Statistics data files, you get what is the educational attainment of each occupation. And so it gives you a percentage of no college, some college, associates, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral. So what we're looking at is a snapshot of the current people employed in the occupations and what is their educational attainment. One thing that this does is it has a little bit of a skew towards employees that have been in the occupation potentially for 20, 30 years. So typically you can find that you might find an occupation that still has a lot of associates or bachelors when it might be moving more towards a master's. And that just might be a more current thing where you still have a lot currently employed at the, with maybe a bachelor's or a lower level. But that comes directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay. So here is marketing. And if we just look at what's the typical educational attainment of the workforce, as an example, 44% of the employees currently employed in the occupations directly related to this program using that direct prep have a bachelor's degree, right? Now, when we look at the educational, from a graduate perspective, 87% have a bachelor's degree. And then from the enrollment standpoint, it's actually a little bit less, 69% at a bachelor's degree, but still majority of marketing graduates are at the bachelor's degree. From a student demand perspective, this is in the top 1%, 99th percentile. You can see all of the volume metrics from Google search, international demand, new student to completions, all show in the top 4% at least. And then 3 of the indicators are growth, are showing growth. Google search is up, new student enrollment is up. The only thing that's down is actually completions, which is actually our past view of this, right? So more current trends are showing that marketing is actually growing. And not surprising, this is a very competitive program, both on ground and there's even online competition with an average program size, however, of 57. So if you have this program and you're able to compete at the average institution nationally, you should have a cohort of about 57, around 57 is what it says. At the median is 24. And then when we look at the employment outcomes, lots of employment opportunity. From a direct prep, we're looking at 75,000 at the mean wage. And then from just the National American Community Survey outcomes, we're looking at potentially wages getting up to 99,000 for 30 to 60. And about 24% of marketing graduates go into occupations related to marketing. Okay. Marianne, any other questions?
We don't have any other questions. Are there any other programs anyone would like to see? Now is your opportunity. Otherwise, we will say thank you for joining us today. I want to thank both Zach and Keith for being with us and sharing all of their insights.
Yes,
We do
and if you would like to join us next month to see the March results, our webcast is on April 27th for the bachelor's and above. And if you're interested at the community college level, we also have one on the day before on the 26th. And
our master class is also coming up, so please pay attention to that. That's going to be really a great time to learn a lot of great information on how to do effective data-informed program evaluation.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and looking forward to seeing you next time. And thank you very much, Keith. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.